The year was 1994, and one weekend in Maine, got a new job, got engaged, and bought a house. All of these events would influence my life, but my attitude was changed by an unassuming older gentleman who owned the local hardware store. This lifelong renter was about to take on the challenges of a new home. Taking on the challenges of a new wife is a whole different speech. After I unpacked the boxes, I grabbed the lawnmower with zest, then struggled to push the machine through the jungle. Bang! I hit a rock. I twisted the blade into some modern-looking piece of art. Nice to admire, not very useful. Staring blankly at a wall of 22 different blades, I met Frank. Take a few, return what you don't use. Do you need my name or number? No, you're Tom Dowd. You live on Lime Rock Street. You just moved in. And I just experienced small town living. When I returned the other blades, he said, if you ever need me, knock on my door or call me. And he meant it. My first memorable run-in with unconditional nice. A simple business model. Be a role model. Be nice. The flavor of the day business ideals of being customer-centric and people-driven are all in vogue. Not Frank. He's always done this. Every move based on being unconditionally nice. Not once has he asked me for business or anything else in return. Time goes by, like it always does. I started to go to the store up the street. They were open on Sundays. Then the big box stores started sprouting up. I was slowly migrating away, not even conscious of my inexcusable excuses to save a few cents. Fast forward 15 years. It was 9:58 on a cold February Sunday night in a driving rainstorm. The big stores were closing for the evening and didn't have time for my call. I was standing in my basement in yellow rubber boots with water up to my knees and a dehumidifier floating by. I attempted to siphon the water out through a garden hose. To no avail. My 3 sump pumps weren't working. One smelled of burning engine. Another whined with an alarm. Wee, 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 while a third sat quietly, saying, call Frank, please. With water continuing to pour in and no end in sight, I made the humbling phone call. Hi, Frank. You may not remember me. This is Tom Dowd. I live on Lime Rock Street. My basement's flooded. I know who you are and where you live. I'll be there in a minute. He didn't ask how he could help. He just did. He picked me up to take me to the store to select a new sump pump. This mechanically deficient individual was overwhelmed again. This time, 27 choices. I probably could have used them all. Take a few, return what you don't use, and all install. On this day, I committed myself to Frank's store, but more importantly, to be this type of person. Shouldn't we all simplify our lives and make the effort to touch people here? Satisfaction guaranteed with an enlightening personality pleasantry with no expected reciprocity. In this me generation, hustle and bustle, I need it now, road rage, flip you some type of unwarranted gesture world we live in. Frank remains grounded. It's never about Frank. It's always about others. Pure, unadulterated, nice. recent flight to St. Louis, I casually struck up a conversation with a woman named Jane. I asked what she did. She smiled and said, "I try to be nice." She went on to say, "I used to be the mean twin, and I loved the attention. But I was also depressed, anxious, and suicidal." It's amazing what perfect strangers will tell you on a plane. With a happy tear rolling down her cheek, she said, "I woke up one morning screaming, 'Stop!' and committed myself to being nice, and my life turned around." Can this be some type of worldwide movement? This isn't just small town living. We are surrounded by Franks and Janes. Do you know who they are? Can it be you? We all have a choice to be a role model, to be nice. When someone's in need, lend them a hand. When they're not, give them a smile. Be unconditionally nice. Be unconditionally nice. Ladies and gentlemen, it also works with spouses. The next one I'm going to do is called My Funeral. Now, I haven't practiced it as much as that last one because of the competition that's coming up. Oops. Before I even start, what mistake did I just make? And what's that do?
Makes us unsure about if we even know your speech.
I like to call those ancillary comments, or apologies, even if I didn't say I'm sorry. I'm apologizing to you for not being ready. I'm hoping that I am. And yes, I have practiced. But you want to be careful of those ancillary comments as you go through the rest of life. Think about the number of times that you apologize and you don't have to. "I'm really tired today. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to give this presentation." Your credibility is at stake. Your credibility is on the line. As soon as I just gave 7 minutes of my life to you and hopefully built just a little bit of credibility. Every minute of those 7 minutes just went away as soon as I said, "I'm not sure if I'm ready for my next speech." It just went away. All of a sudden you're like, "Yeah, that's maybe I was all right." But credibility. Now it's in question because I'm not sure if I'm ready for this. So let's see how it goes. I like to call this one My Funeral. Have you ever imagined your own funeral? Who will do the eulogy? Who will be your pallbearer? Who will attend or even care? I attended my own funeral. Let me explain. But before I do, I need to disclose that no one died or was injured in the making of the speech. On a typical day where I was happily playing solitaire and checking out Facebook at work, I got the call. June 6th, the anniversary of D-Day. Not World War II. Displacement Day. The day my 23-year job was eliminated. Just like that, it was all over. Hard work, tenure, and skills had nothing to do with this cost-cutting decision. Is it curious that my first thought wasn't to call my wife, but that I had to find a new Toastmasters club? On my ride to work on that fateful day, a news report announced 175,000 new jobs in the U.S., making the unemployment rate 7.6%. On my ride home, I was on the other side, one of the 11.7 million unemployed. To grasp the magnitude, take the entire population of New York City, then add 4 million people. The call was like a shot to the head. My work identity was gone immediately. I was being put to rest and people were preparing for my funeral. Condolences rolled in. Hugs happened. Tears flowed. How will people see you when you're gone? An old manager once asked if I ran through a wall, would people follow me? At the time, I didn't know the answer. I needed to know the answer. That was a call to action, a lifeline. Fast forward 6 years later. I don't recall a more calming day in my life. A day of self-reflection, a chance to hover over my dead body and ask, was my life and career a success? The notes flooded in. Tom, we love you. This is your next speech. Tom, you touched me. Personally and professionally, more than you'll ever know. I ran through a wall, and people followed. But how was I going to tell my 3 daughters that Dad was being sent to a farm just like his childhood dog? The spending freeze on shoes, clothes, and pizza is worse than death to teenagers. My middle child's head tilted at a mourner's angle as a tear slowly rolled down her cheek as if to fall on my casket. My youngest held me in a bear hug as if it was the last time ever. My social media conscious 16-year-old told me that our responses to the relocation question on Facebook was, no. As if I had a choice. The denial, the anger, the acceptance, the exhaustive feeling of having my family watch my own demise. But my support system refused to let the last nail go into the coffin as they put in a crowbar made of emails, phone calls, and leads. I was being resuscitated. How many of you have a will prepared? A will reduces stress and chaos. The run through the wall question 6 years earlier had been my wake-up call. I didn't realize how it would prevent my professional passing. My eyes were wide open as I built an extraordinary career-saving and life-changing network. In Keith Ferrazzi's book, Never Eat Alone, he notes, build it before you need it. Real relationships built over the years provided me meaning and are the reason for my success. I wasn't 6 feet under. I was 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon, or at least my next big leap. I wasn't flatlined. I was alive, and my support system was my CPR. My job loss was a celebration of life, not a funeral. It reminded me how deep my love and appreciation really are for my family, friends, and network. I wasn't defined by my job. I defined my own life, and I was going to do my funeral my way. No, I'm not going to belt out Sinatra. I lost my job. I found me. I used my displacement as a reaffirmation that when I leave this earth, I'm leaving with no regrets. Think about your own funeral. When your spirit's hovering over the mourner, did you give them something to mourn about? So let's go back to the original question. Have you ever imagined your own funeral? Who will do the eulogy? Who will be your pallbearers? Who will attend or even care? My eulogy was shouted out by the many key people on my network who blew my trumpet with humbling accounts of who I was and had become. My pallbearers carried me when I couldn't go any further. The overwhelming flood of notes and messages showed you care. I have to admit I started writing the speech immediately after I lost my job, including the ending. We all know we're going to die. Not that ending. The speech ending, the one where I secured a job. It wasn't overconfidence. It's just a belief that I'm surrounded by an ironclad network that refused to stop giving me oxygen. Are you ready to see your own future? I saw mine, and it was beautiful. Thank you. What'd you think?
I thought it was very good. It was extraordinary.
I'm not fishing for compliments, by the way. Did it touch you?
Yes.
Did you feel something?
Yes.
Did it relate to you in any way?
Yes.
And it's going to relate to each of you in different ways, both of them. So let's go to the first one. What was that about? What was the key message?
Be a nice person.
Okay, be a nice person. So did that relate to you somehow? How could that relate to you as individuals?
Thinking about your everyday life, you can be nicer to everybody you meet throughout your whole day.
Okay. Do you think it's a fairly broad message? Or is it targeted towards college freshmen?
No. Oh, no. In that aspect, it's broad.
Okay. Why do you think it's a broad message?
Because it can be applied to anybody.
Okay.
There's no specific person who will be nicer than other people.
Okay, that's a great point. And the fact that I have to give it in front of a bunch of Toastmasters and I don't know who the audience is, I have to keep it somewhat broad. If I came in and gave a speech specifically for college freshmen, said, as college freshmen, you need to gain confidence as you progress through your career as college students, I lose portions of the audience. One of the things that annoys my wife the most when she attends a Toastmasters conference is everyone comes in and says, because I did it in my second speech, I said, I didn't call my wife, I had to think about a Toastmasters speech. So I made a little jab towards Toastmasters. Did not relate to you as an audience, which, by the way, is intentional, and I know that. But my wife goes in and she says, I'm a guest at a Toastmasters conference. The public is welcome. Why are people only talking about Toastmasters? And she's right, by the way. You have to find a way to constantly relate to your audience. And if you don't know who your audience is, give a message that can relate to your audience. And you have to find a way to relate. You can't just give some broad message and give the same speech over and over. This conversation I'm having with you, I'm hoping, will differ than a conversation I would have at a Lions Club or Rotary Club. Good. What else?
I thought it was interesting that besides the example of Frank, you have the person on the airplane, which essentially could be us. That person could be us, and we can turn our lives around. So you have the long example of Frank, and he sounds like a wonderful person. And then you have this person we could become. All we have to do is like turn around and boom, we can make ourselves.
So I'll ask what my wife always asks me, what's the BS factor? Like how much of that speech was true on a percentage basis?
The thing is, I'm from Massachusetts, and the area is unlikely to be as nice as that. And I haven't met anyone like that before, to be honest with you, from Massachusetts. And so that's the only reason why it seems far-fetched to me. But someone else who lives in more of a rural area, like, I feel like they're a lot nicer, because they're definitely a lot nicer than me.
And it's interesting because it started off when I wrote the original speech. I sent it to somebody in Maryland whose first reaction was, well, this is nice. Is it all about small town? And that's part of the message is, it's not just small town. And if you haven't found it in Massachusetts, you will. And that's part of the messaging of, if you can't find it, go out and look for it and act the part as well and be both. So that's part of the messaging. Did that come out? Okay. Because, now let's put a BS factor on it. The BS factor on this one is 98%. Like it's true. It's 98% true. The 2% that's not is timing purposes and switching around and cutting down some actual quotes and stuff. I met that woman. I was on my way to St. Louis for a Toastmasters convention. And I just started chatting with the woman, and not her exact words, but her exact story. And she said, I used to be the mean twin, and in the 8th grade, I woke up one day screaming, stop. Now, why didn't I add that 8th grade in the speech? Why didn't I put that piece in the speech? Too young? Okay.
Yeah. Well, you think about, like, being in 8th grade is not, like, a lot of stuff that you've been through already. So,
Okay.
as far as, like, her being, like, an adult woman, it makes it sound like it might have been, like, 2-3 years from now, and it changed her life completely around. Yeah, I think it makes it more substantial that now that she's so far into her life, she still can change her life around.
How old do you think that woman was?
I don't know.
Doesn't matter.
She's on a plane by herself, so I imagine
Okay. So I'm allowing you as the audience to make your own assessment of who she was and how old she is. But if I brought the 8th grade in, I think you bring up a really good point of the meaning behind her own transformation changes. The meaning isn't as deep when she said I did it in the 8th grade. Now, she talked about, she went on and on and on about all the things she changed since the 8th grade, so it was fascinating. But I didn't have time in my speech to tell you that. And it's not important how old she was. It's not important the color of her shoes. And many years ago, I would have gone into all this detail, what she was wearing, how she sounded, how old she was. It's not relevant to the message. And so take that into consideration as you're writing out your speeches. And for those like myself who are detail-oriented, who said, I have to include it all in, the answer is no, you don't. And start pulling out the eraser and start erasing some of the stuff that doesn't have to be there. And it's like the word awesome. Now, you guys use the word awesome a lot or hear it a lot. Yep. Next time you hear that word, take it out of the sentence and ask if the meaning of that sentence changes. And the answer is it usually doesn't. It's the same type of thing as if you take it out of your speech, does the meaning of your message go away? And if the answer is no, you take that. And that's probably one of the things that I have to fight the most is taking stuff out versus adding more in. So you had a point?
I was just going to say, if you didn't state that she was in 8th grade, it opens it up, like you said, you can do it at any point in your life. Even though she might not have gone through that much at so young an age. It doesn't matter how much you've gone through, you can always change.
And here's what's interesting about Frank, and I just spoke at, I'm an honorary member at the local Lions Club. I did a speaking engagement for the state of Maine Lions, and they said, you can be an honorary member. So I've been going to Camden periodically, and they allow me to go in and speak to them and practice my speaking. And I gave this speech on Frank, and they said, did you know Frank is a member? He hasn't been here in years, but he's a member. And I said, I think I knew that. It was one of those things I knew but forgot. And so someone raises their hand and said, well, Frank is taking care of this woman at a nursing home, is paying for her nursing home, who's a customer at the hardware store. And got to know her over the years through the hardware store, and he's doing it just to be nice. Someone else raises their hand and said, well, Frank did this for me. I needed to go in and get this drill, and I really didn't need to buy it. And so he went up there and handed it to me, told me to borrow it and bring it on back. And then another person comes in and says, well, my son was going to a construction college, and he needed all this equipment and all of this material. And he went to pay for it, and Frank said, no, just go.
So, how does he make any money? He always is lending stuff out.
Think about it like LL Bean with their 100% guaranteed return policy.
Yeah.
I won't go anywhere else. And so I will go there, and I'll pay a little bit higher prices, but I know what I'm getting, and I know who's getting it. And he doesn't do it for the money, he does it for the love of seeing the community. And you start to pick up on that, and he makes enough money to live, and he meets his goals. His goals are to meet people and be this nice person, and that's valuable. Sometimes we get caught up in the materiality thing, and he has found a business model that works for him. But that business model has translated into life model, and that's the piece that, it took me 15 years of living in that community to figure that out, but I did. So let's go to the first. So let's talk about what you liked about Unconditionally Nice.
About speech and listen.
You can talk about both. If you didn't get the message, I've got an issue.
I guess I kind of get the message because I hate being in a bad mood myself or being negative, and I hate when people around me are negative, so I try to be in a nicer mood, keep everyone in that positive mood. So I guess I kind of relate to the message.
How do you think I constructed that speech?
I think it was good. It's kind of like a timeline, so it's like
Okay, chronological.
Yeah.
And did I write the stories out? Just blank piece of paper, let's go, and start writing these stories? What did I write first? I had a speech I was going to dust off that was a few years old. And I was going to use that in the competition. My wife said, no, write a different speech. Why don't you write one on a frame? Now, I have a pile of notebook paper in this folder. It's about this thick now. Anytime I get any type of speech idea or story idea, I put it in this folder. I have a notepad next to my nightstand. I wake up probably 3 times a night with these random thoughts, write them down, scribbling, can't barely remember what it was and can barely read what's on there. Just usually 1 or 2 words, and it's enough to go off of and then figure out what the rest of it is. And you let your stories and speeches germinate that way. And I have this folder, and Frank's in that folder. And so I pulled it out and looked at some notes I had written up and said, you know, it's not a bad idea. So my next question is, why Frank? Why is Frank important to me? And so I start writing down, Frank's important to me because he has taught me some lessons in life that others have probably tried and it just didn't click. So did I write the story first or the message first? Okay. Now I used to write my speeches story first and jam the message in later. Because there's usually a message in there somewhere. But the message always seemed to be very forced. And every once in a while you can smooth it in there and it can be there, but that's a backwards way of writing your speech. You have to figure out what your message is first. Sometimes I'll take a blank piece of paper and just put the okay, nice. Put the message nice in there. And then start saying, okay, I had that story about, I knew of the construction person, so I actually had that story in there. And I debated, do I want to include Jane or do I want to include Adam? And I had to figure out which one to put in there. So that's how I constructed it. But if you have this blank piece of paper, you just start brainstorming with yourself, or bring a bunch of people together and say, hey, do you know Frank? Or do you know the story? Or do you have stories about Frank? And you can start doing that. And that's how you can construct a speech. So there are 3 main points to a speech. What are they? Yeah. Delivery. Probably didn't frame the question up right. But in the written piece of the speech, you have the introduction. What else? The body. And the conclusion. So did the introduction of Unconditionally Nice get your attention? I mean, I could have gone up and down dancing and cartwheels. It's one way to do it. I've started speeches singing, which you're lucky you didn't hear that. But when I say the year is 1994, what goes on in your heads besides you probably weren't born?
That was wonderful.
Yeah, that's the year I was born. See, I did write it for you guys. Wow, makes me sound old. What does that year do for you? Like, is the year 1994 important?
Yeah, because that's when most of us were born, so, I mean,
It brings you to that age, that time period.
So I bring you back to a certain point in time. So when I start the speech, your minds are like, 1994, that's when I was born. And what's that do? It says to you, I am 18 years old, or however old you are. And you start saying, oh, well, that's 18 years ago. So some of you might say that's a long time ago. Some of you may say that was recent history. Some of you may, whatever it is, but you have a point of reference now. And then I talk about my job, my wife. So up top, I talk about my new job, buying a house, and my new wife. Did I ever come back to that? Do I need to come back to it?
No, that's part of it.
Okay. The house, the job piece, I didn't think was relevant enough to bring it back on. There were a couple times in the speeches where I gave trilogies or 3s. My job, my wife. I'm talking about got a new job, got engaged, and bought a house.
I think those are all
And then it was crammed all in a weekend, so you would think to some extent it would grab your attention to say, I wouldn't do that. But your mind's spinning now, your mind's thinking, and where's he going with this? Didn't think I needed to come back to the job. Do you guys think I needed to come back to the job, Pete?
No.
I made a quick reference to my wife. I've got my new house, and here's my wife reference. Brought her back into it a little just to say that she's there in the wings somewhere.
You know, with a nice stage whisper, you're leaning forward and whispering to us, which is sweet.
So that was a change of vocal variety. And I brought her back at the end. What did you think of the very last comment? Did it grab your attention? Did it end the speech with a little smile? Or at least a chuckle, or just a curve of the mouth maybe going up? Or at least that's what the intentions were. Now I have another ending. I didn't even have that in there. I say, lend a hand. And I used to do my smile this way. What type of feedback do you think I got on this one? Is there anything wrong with it? Oh, this is, but this one's not. It's small. It's small. It's not big. And the guy said, looks like you're choking yourself if you don't come up high enough. Okay. So he said, just do this. And it became a little bit more grandiose. And now some of your mouths, not all, but some of your mouths started doing this. And I used to ask for an audience response. And I would say, lend a hand, give a smile, be unconditionally nice. And then I would say all together,
Be unconditionally nice.
and that's typically the response I would get. Dogs saying it, no one else. When you ask for a response to your call out, it's dangerous, especially in a competition. What were my intentions of doing that? By saying, what do you think?
Get the audience involved.
Get the audience involved.
Make sure they're paying attention.
Make sure that they're paying attention. Because if you're not paying attention, you will. But by that point in the speech, if you're not going to. Like, you're 6.5 minutes in the hole. You're not going to all of a sudden come out and do this. And I was taking too much of a chance by doing it. But now when I say, be unconditionally nice, what did I do after that? Do you remember?
You said it again.
But did I change the way that I said it?
Yeah.
And how did I say it?
Soft.
I was kind of nodding my head. Be unconditionally nice. And what are my intentions with that move?
Just set it in.
It's what?
Like, set it in their mind.
Okay. So reaffirmation.
You change your vocal variety to make it hit someone harder, and it's easier to listen to it.
So you already heard the message. So if for some reason I'm too soft and you can't hear it, I don't lose a whole lot. But now you're going to start doing this. And you might pay a little bit of attention because I dropped my voice soft enough that you're going to pay attention. But I'm also reaffirming to myself. I've got to beat it into myself, being unconditionally nice. And by saying that, it's like, yeah, I get it. I hope you get it. And then I throw that little piece in there about my wife. And so it becomes this whole different component towards the end. And you think I thought about the end? I thought about it a lot. Think it's a strong enough ending, or do you have improvements for the end? Thoughts?
I think the ending does what you want everybody to think in the audience, and everybody can be better, everybody can be nicer. That's what your goal is, and the way you say it at the end, make sure that the ending and the start's the most important. It's part of the speech.
Yeah, at least to wrap it up, there's a lot of people out there that say, oh, I don't like to write my speeches out. I you're one of those people, which I am complete opposite, but if you are that person, if you do nothing more than to write out your introduction, your speech, and your message, you have to do that. Because your audience doesn't know how you're going to conclude. You don't know how you're going to conclude. And how many times have you been in a situation where you're not sure when the person's going to end? Did you just end your speech? Oh, wait, no, here's the end. So let me summarize my points for you. 1, 2, 3. In addition to those 3 points, I'm going to keep going on, and maybe I'll conclude, and I really appreciate you guys being here. And oh yeah, let me end this thing again. So let's talk about the stage movement. When I was talking about my children and their reaction to my job loss, where was I standing on stage? What's that? In the middle.
I thought you were walking around too much.
Okay, you thought I was walking around too much. Okay. Anyone else? And by the way, my skin is this thick, so I appreciate stuff like that. What's that?
I said, you saw.
Yeah, but that's about where you were standing, right?
That's about where I was standing.
Right.
When I was talking about the will, do you remember where I was? I started the will or the Kevin Bacon piece.
I didn't understand that joke. The Kevin Bacon joke.
Do you mean like Kevin Bacon's acting career?
Do you know the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon?
No.
Okay, you're too young. My audience with Toastmasters will get that speech. Dog, did you get it?
No. Oh. I don't go to movies.
The 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, it's actually been researched. It started off as a joke. You're too young, but it's a drinking game as well. It is a game where there are 6 connections, and it will always end with Kevin Bacon. So this person knows this person, who knows this person, who knows this person, who knows this person, who will ultimately know Kevin Bacon. So when I talk about the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon is, I'm only 6 steps away from getting my next job. But what happens is, if you're part of the unemployed, your reaction is those 6 steps are really far away. But if you've ever played the game of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, and no, I don't sit at home playing the Kevin Bacon game, but if I'm sitting there understanding the concept, is that's not far away at all. And part of the messaging of this speech has to do with attitude. Like, I had to believe I was going to get a job, and I didn't have any time to waste. Did you guys pick up on that?
Not really.
Okay.
For the funeral one, the way that you started it, I thought that you were gonna, because obviously you're not dead right now, I thought you were gonna talk about, like, what you plan for your funeral, like what you want it to be like and all that stuff. But then you went off in like a total other direction, and I was like, what the heck? So, I mean, I guess maybe the beginning could change a little, but I don't know if that's something you would do. But just because it was, I guess, confusing to me, I didn't really.
Okay. In the confusion, was there intention behind that confusion? A quick shift.
Yeah.
Because if I start by saying my funeral, where are all your minds go? You're starting to think, what happened? Did he come back from life? Did somebody give him CPR? Where was he? And so you start. So the intention was to throw you a quick curveball and then bring you back into. Let me walk you into the analogy. So there was I'm trying to use the funeral as an analogy component. Maybe it didn't connect with you. I'm hoping it connected with some of you. But and there is. Which one do you think is a stronger speech?
Probably the first one.
First one.
Okay. Okay. I agree, by the way, which is why I'm not competing with the second one. I wrote the second one, and it was pure emotion. Like the BS pieces on that is probably about 2% too. So it's 98% right. I just pulled out a piece of paper as soon as I got that call, and I started writing down some notes. Which, by the way, is the first chapter of my next book. That's coming out next month. Called Displacement Day, when my job was looking for a job. And I wanted to get my clear head and just put it all to paper, and I really truly did write the ending because it gave me a new goal to work towards. Because if you've ever been unemployed, and you guys don't have to worry about this yet, But if you're ever unemployed, the first thing you're going to say, especially after you've been working for 23 years, is, woe is me. And then you're going to say, well, let me sit here and lick my wounds for a little bit, and then let me kind of just hang out. Let me find myself for a couple months, give myself a little bit of a rest, and then once I'm re-energized, I'll start looking for a job. You don't have time for that. You don't have time to waste when you're looking for a job. So I wanted to bring that piece. Now, did you feel that there was some emotion that was in there? Now, you guys aren't old enough to look for a job yet, a full-time job. But could this story relate to you somehow? Probably not as much as the other one. But could you still find a way to relate to the story? So I want to come back to the piece on walking too much. The intentions of where I am in a certain part on the stage does what?
It's to show you that you're at a different part of the story, or you're at a different place.
Okay. Could be a different place in life, different part of speech, different time. And maybe I grew up a little bit. Maybe I went backwards 15 years. A lot of people call it anchoring your stories. And there's a couple components for it. First of all, a lot of people won't remember the message. So let's go back to the story I told, not the speech, but the story I told on losing your virginity. What's the message in there? There is a message. It was 30 seconds, but there's a message. But I didn't tell you what the message was, and I didn't give it context, so you can come up with a message.
Well, I would think that parents and kids are on the same page. And parents think they understand their kids, and they really don't. The kids.
Yeah. Naivety of children, twists and turns to the story, casual conversations gone awry. Any one of those could have been picked up. But there's a message in there. And that message didn't always have to come out. Now, usually something that short, you're not going to have the context, but there is context after you add a little bit of context, or allowing you to give your context. You'll put it in there. So you have a message, and it gets supported with a story. My 12-year-old saying, I know what virginity is, I don't know what losing is. So you have the message, the story, and then you have the delivery, or the location, or the stage presence. Because you may not remember the message, but you'll remember some guy a couple months ago gave some story about losing your virginity, and I think it was fun. You'll remember the message then, at some point. And you may even come back and say, I don't even remember the guy, it was something about tobogganing or something. Oh yeah, he was standing here when he said it. And so it helps to anchor the story. So it's part of your retaining the information, because it tells where you were in the story, or tells where you were on stage. Not all the time. It's not every story has to be anchored. But I try to be very conscious about where I stand. And what's interesting is you say I walk too much. I probably talk too much too. My very first contest speech. This is exactly how I looked. Exactly how I gave my speech 5 years ago. Now, I was fortunate enough to move on to the next level. Someone said, Tom, come here. He said, you're a little uptight. Your shoulders are a little tense. The audience feels that tension. I said, I know, but I don't know what to do about it. And they said, you got to loosen up a little bit. Maybe walk the stage. And I said, fine. What do you think of this? Isn't this much better? Isn't this great? Your eyes are darting back and forth. That is not an exaggeration of how fast and how far I moved when I was giving my first competitive speech at the next level. I was fortunate enough to finish second and move on again. Don't know how. I think the content of the speech was half decent. But the purpose of that, it really led to, I've got to find somewhere in the middle. Because standing upright like this, after a while, I'm going to come back to this at some point if I don't move. Because it drives me crazy. Can't stand being behind a lectern. I feel so taken away from the audience. And one of the things I love to do as a speaker is find that connection point with the audience. I'm surprised some of you didn't say you were too far back on the stage. Now, there's two reasons for that. There's one, I come to the front of the stage enough. And it's one thing, go back and look at all the speakers when you look at examples. And look at the depth of the stage. A lot of speakers don't use the depth of the stage. But if I am center stage, it's usually a pretty important message somewhere. If I come towards you, you start to figure out, now I'm starting to engage you, or I might lean forward a little bit. But using the depth of the stage is much more powerful in the grand scheme of the speech than just going back and forth on the front. And you start to pick up on how I use the stage, and maybe you can start to pick up on it. But the other point on the walking and the talking piece is I would also do this. I would finish my sentence, and then I would start my speech back up again. Now, in a lot of cases, can that work? Absolutely. And it should. But if I do that every single time I look to walk to another piece of the stage, my dramatic pauses get overused. But there was a time, there were a couple points in the speech where I dramatically moved from this one, and I hope you kind of saw my head do a little bit of this, kind of thinking to myself. You get to pick up on where I am. And that silence allows the audience to take a breath and try to get into my head and figure out what I'm trying to say, and I anchor it. So I try to go back and forth, sometimes of talking while I'm walking. And it was, believe it or not, my wife again who gave me that feedback. And there's this guy by the name of Charlie. He's an incredible speaker. And he's always at one speech away from the World Semifinals. He's been to the World Semifinals a couple times, and I'll wrap up right after this. I've never seen him speak because anytime I've ever competed against him, I've been outside practicing my speech. And my wife said, watch Charlie. He's having a conversation with the audience. Every single one of the audience members. And he walks while he's talking. And so he's just having a regular conversation. And I've never felt it's distracting. And my wife would say, try it. And so that's where I've started to try it a little bit. So maybe I need to still hone it a little bit or refine it. But that's the goal of what I'm trying to accomplish, is to be able to touch you guys in a manner that you say, I get it, I relate to you enough, and I can feel you're one of me, and we're just having a conversation at the dinner table or walking down the street. Any last questions or comments before we wrap up?
Tom, could you tell us about the talking sump pump? That was wonderful. It's so imaginative, and all the different voices you use. Tell us about the talking sump pump if you could.
I gave a speech. You remember the Jack speech. I gave a speech about a friend of mine who passed.
Great.
And I spoke to the world champion of public speaking. And he gave me feedback. And he said, I like the story. He said, so do I. You can't tell. And what he said is, it's sameness. He said it's all sameness. And it's not about being a character. And I don't dress up for Halloween. I don't do character voices. But it was a very big moment for me last year, an aha moment of, for voice inflection, I have to catch the audience if I'm losing them somehow. It gives you a chance to come back. And if you're giving an hour-long speech, they say every 7 minutes you have to have some type of joke or some type of humor to bring the audience back. Same type of thing with voice inflection. That all of a sudden you're like, what? Now, did you understand the words that Frank said?
Yeah.
Okay. They weren't mumbled. I've had a tendency every once in a while to go into mumble mode. I am going to bring out an apology here. I've had this cold for weeks, and my high voice, which actually really doesn't get that high to begin with, it's cracking. I feel like my voice is changing a little bit. So I've been working on which high voice to use for her, and I get inconsistent with that. Did I use the same voice with her?
Yeah.
Was it? Was there a consistency in her voice?
Yeah.
Because as soon as I can catch, I'll call it the key, you really don't want to hear me singing, but as soon as I can catch the right key, I can usually keep it in that, at least the same range. But the voice inflections really are intended to grab your attention and say, all right, I get it.
Great. Tom, this is unbelievable. Ladies and gentlemen, we are having